In the Union Hall on the east side of Gary, Indiana, on a night in 1972, 100 men were on their feet at once, shouting each other down over a layoff list, and the fellow up front with a gavel had given up trying to be heard a good while before. Then an old millwright named Augie pushed up out of a folding chair near the back, slow, on bad knees, and just stood there. He did not call for quiet. He waited until the men nearest him noticed and went still, and the quiet spread out from him across the room until the whole hall full of furious men was waiting on what he would say. He said about 2 sentences. The meeting went on like grown men again. I was 21 and 3 weeks on the floor, watching from the back row, and I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand what I saw him do. Augie was a man of the 1950s, formed in rooms that are gone now. He learned to handle a crowd the way every working man of that era learned it, in the Union Hall and the corner tavern and the lodge, the rooms where men gathered after a shift, and a man standing got settled in front of everybody. In 1954, about a third of all American workers carried a union card, the most they ever would, and the hall was the second home of the working man. Then the work changed, and the neighborhoods emptied toward the suburbs, so the halls thinned, and the corner taverns followed them down, and the boys coming up had nowhere left to watch older men do this. The skill did not outlive the room that taught it. There is one rule here, number 2, that these men leaned on harder than any other and almost never said out loud, because said plain it sounds backwards. I am going to make you wait for that one. Some of the others you could use tonight, the first one most of all. And number 1 is so plain you will wonder why it needed saying. Right up until you see it was the floor the other 29 were standing on. Here is what these 30 have in common. Not one of them takes size or rank or schooling. They are things a man does with his attention, his voice, and his nerve, and they were how an ordinary fellow made a hard room easier just by being in it. Number 30. He came in already knowing every name. Augie would cross a crowded tavern floor and have a word for each man at the bar before he reached his stool, and never the same word twice. He knew whose boy had shipped out, whose back had finally gone, which man was between jobs and touchy about it. That knowing was the dividend of a place where you saw the same 40 men 3 nights a week for 20 years, and a man who is known walks in with the floor already half his. Number 29, he stood the round at the right second. A foreman I worked under would lay $1 on the bar the instant 2 men's voices started to climb and buy a beer for both of them, and the quarrel lost its legs because now they owed him a thank you instead of a fight. The whole tavern ran on that small economy of bought rounds, and the man who read the moment best ran the tavern. Number 28, 1 tap on a glass and a room full of rowdy men went quiet. At the union meetings, right through the 1950s, before anybody bothered with a microphone, a steward would take a spoon to a beer glass twice, and a room that had been hollering would settle right down. The spoon had no power in it. Everyone had simply agreed, without once saying so, that this was the man you got quiet for, and that kind of agreement only forms in a room that meets over and over. Number 27. When the room got loud, he got quiet. Most men answer a rising voice with a louder one, and 2 loud men drag everybody else up with them. The men who could hold a room did the reverse. The angrier the floor got, the lower and slower they spoke, until other men had to stop and lean in to catch the words. A room cannot stay at a boil while the man it is straining to hear refuses to. Number 26. He was the stillest body in a moving room. Arguments are all motion, men shifting their weight, jabbing fingers, rolling their shoulders. The one man who plants himself and does not so much as twitch becomes the one every eye keeps going back to, because that stillness reads as a man who is not afraid of anything that is coming. The other men felt it and quietly steadied themselves against him without knowing they were doing it. That next quiet trick is one man had read about and never credited to a book. Number 25. He used a man's name to cut through the noise. There is an old line from Dale Carnegie, back when that book sat on a lot of working men's shelves, that a man's own name is the sweetest sound in any language. These men never needed the book. They knew that in a roaring room, a man's name, spoken straight at him, lands like a hand on the arm and pulls him out of the mob in his own head. They said the name first every time before anything else. Number 24, he kept his hands open and where you could see them. A man who is about to make trouble does something with his hands first, sets the glass down hard, makes a fist, reaches. The men who could cool a room did the opposite without thinking, palms open, hands easy on the bar, nothing hidden, every line of him saying, "I am not the threat here." Other men's shoulders came down to match it. Number 23, he asked a question instead of giving an order. Tell a heated man to settle down and you have handed him something to push against. Augie never told anybody to settle down. He asked them something instead, what time their shift started, whether they had heard about the layoffs in the 4 High, anything at all, because a question hands a man a different job than the one he was about to do. Number 22, he could take a joke at his own expense and laugh first. A man who bristles when the room ribs him teaches everyone to walk careful around his pride, and a room walking careful is a room holding its breath. The men who could hold a crowd were the opposite. They let the younger hands needle them about a bald spot or a bad hand at cards, and they laughed before anybody else did, and the whole place loosened a notch, because if the steadiest man in the room could be laughed at and not mind, there was nothing left to be afraid of. Most of these you could practice. This next one my father simply had in him. Number 21, he let a silence sit and would not rush to fill it. My father did this at our own kitchen table, and I hated it as a boy. Someone would say a foolish or a cruel thing, and instead of answering, he would let it hang there, looking down at his plate, until the man who said it heard it again in the quiet and wished he had not. Most men cannot stand that silence and will talk themselves back down into reason just to end it. My father could outlast any silence in the county. Number 20, he could hold a man's eye without it being a challenge. There is a way of looking a man in the eye that says, "I will fight you," and a way that says, "I see you, and I am not going anywhere," and they are nearly the same look with all the difference in the world. The best of them had that second look, level and patient, no heat in it, and they could hold it through anything a drunk man threw at them. Number 19, he let an insult drop where the man said it. A man throws an insult to start a trade, and if you do not pick it up, there is no trade. The men who ran a room had a kind of deafness they could switch on, a way of letting the ugliest line sail right past, as if the air had swallowed it. It drove a hothead wild, and it ended quarrels that no clever answer ever could. I am not going to stand here and tell you those rooms were all good. The people who were glad to see them empty had their reasons, and some of the reasons were fair. A corner tavern drank more than one man clean out of his own family, and I knew the kids who waited up for fathers who never came home sober. The lodge and the Union Hall could be hard, closed places too, and a man who was the wrong color or came off the wrong street often found the door shut to him, and that was real and it was wrong. So I will not sell you a paradise we lost, but something went out with the bad. Those same rooms were the only school a young man ever got in how to stand in a crowd of other men, how to bring a temper down, how to be the steady one at the back of the bar. We closed the tavern and kept nothing that did its quiet work, and 2 generations of men have come up since with no place left to learn the thing at all. Number 18, he would step his own body into the gap between 2 men about to go. This took real nerve, and I want to be honest, because it is also the one that got men hurt. Augie did it more nights than I ever managed to see. He would put himself in the middle, hands open, talking low, and most of the time the 2 of them were secretly grateful for a reason to stop. But not always. I watched a man take a bottle once that had been meant for somebody else, doing exactly this. So I will not dress it up as pure wisdom. Part of it was a plain willingness to bleed for the peace of a room, and that is a harder thing than the manners books ever let on. Number 17, he set a flat hand on a man's shoulder at the right second. Not a grab, not a hold, just the weight of a palm, the way you steady something about to tip. My grandfather did it to me once, when I was a breath away from saying a thing to my father I could never have taken back. Just a hand. I sat down. The next one is the one I have carried the longest, so let me tell it slow. Number 16. He stood up for the man who could not stand up for himself. There was a fellow on our crew, a slow-spoken man named Pete, who stuttered badly, and a new hand started writing him about it one lunch, doing the stutter back at him for a laugh. The room went quiet in that bad way, half of them ashamed, and not one of them moving. Then an old crane operator we called Whitey set down his sandwich and said, plain and not loud, that Pete had pulled him out from under a load in 1958 and could talk however God meant him to for the rest of his life, as far as Whitey was concerned. Pete kept his eyes down on his sandwich and said nothing, the way he always did. That was all of it. The new hand never opened his mouth about it again, and a room remembers for years who spoke up and who studied the floor when it counted. He owned that lunchroom from that day on and never once had to ask for it. Number 15. In the middle of a standoff, he sat down, two men on their feet, chests out, and the man who wanted it over would pull out a chair and lower himself into it, slow, and start talking from down there. You cannot keep squaring off over a seated man. It breaks the whole posture of the thing. Number 14. He could put a stare on a man that shut the conversation. Here is where I have to push back on my own nostalgia, because some of these men were not wise so much as hard, and they had learned to do their hardness quietly. A tavern owner near the mill, a thick old man named Dabrowski, could look at a troublemaker in a way that sent him hunting for the door, and we all admired it. But I am old enough now to see that a fair amount of what we called presence was only menace with its manners on. The stare that cools a room and the stare that bullies a room are cousins, and the men of that time did not always know which one they were handing out. Number 13. He walked the hothead outside before the room ever saw him blow. You do not calm a furious man in front of an audience because the audience is half of why he is furious. So Augie would get an arm around him and steer him out into the cold, not to fight him, just to get him alone, where his pride was off the line, and out on the sidewalk the man would come apart into whatever was actually wrong, a wife who had left, a layoff coming, a sick kid at home. Half of every barroom rage was grief that had found no other door. Number 12. He covered a man's tab so quietly the man almost never knew. You never let another working man be shamed in front of the room for coming up short, so the bill simply got handled, a word to the bartender, and the matter vanished. A man named Kowalski did this for my uncle in a bad winter, and my uncle did not learn of it for 2 years. It bought nothing and was meant to buy nothing, and the rooms were full of kindnesses with no receipt. In 1954, about a third of all American workers belonged to a union. Today it is closer to 1 in 10, and in private industry nearer 1 in 16. Those are not only numbers about wages and contracts. Every one of those halls was a room where a young man watched older men handle each other, learned by the year what worked and what started fights, and slowly grew the bearing into himself. I sat in our local as a boy through 2-hour arguments that never once got raised past a hard word, and I learned more about men in those folding chairs than school ever taught me. When the hall on our street finally locked its doors in the late 70s, nothing rose to do what it had done. The men lost a building, the boys lost a school. If any of this is landing, if you remember a room like that, or a man like Augie, do me the one favor and subscribe. There is no monument anywhere to the man who could walk into a hard room and bring it down to size, and there ought to be something. I put one of these together every week, and as long as men keep watching, these old codes get said out loud one more time before they go for good. By the time I was old enough to drink in those rooms myself, this next one was already the rarest thing in them. Number 11. He settled the dispute by splitting the difference out loud in front of everyone. Before there were managers and personnel departments, 2 men with a real grievance brought it to whichever older man the floor trusted, and he heard both sides standing right there and said what was fair, and because he said it in the open, both men could live with it. His whole authority was that nobody doubted he was even-handed. A man lost that once, and he was finished as the one who settled things. The next one looks like a man just killing an hour with an old story. Watch what it actually did to a room. Number 10. He told a long story at the exact moment a room needed to breathe. When the tension climbed too high to break head-on, the men who could read a room would start in on something else entirely, a fishing trip, a foreman from 20 years back, and the room would follow them out of the danger, almost grateful for the exit. I watched my father do it at a wake that was about to turn into a fight between two sides of the family. He started telling about the dead man stealing a watermelon in 1940. By the end of it, the whole room was laughing. Number 9, he moved toward the trouble before it started. The men who could do this read a room the way you read weather, and the reading showed up as a thing they did with their feet, not a thing they kept inside. One of them would set his glass down and drift over toward the table that was about to go while the men at it were still only getting loud, so that by the time it tipped, he was already standing right there, a hand on the back of a chair, part of the talk before it knew it had been joined. A thing you reach that early still turns on one quiet word. This next one is about what a man does with his own pride, and that is harder than anything he does with his hands. Number 8, he let the other man have the last word. The men who needed to win every exchange were never the ones who ran a room. The ones who ran it could let a lesser man walk off sure he had gotten the better of it because they were not keeping that kind of score, and other men clocked the difference on a face inside a second. Number 7, he kept his own drinking in check so that at midnight he was the steady one. I will be straight with you, since this is a list about taverns. A great many of these rooms ran on too much beer, and some of the men I am praising drank in a way that wrecked them at home. But the ones who truly held a room had a hard line on themselves. They nursed it, they stayed clear enough to be the last man still thinking. When I was young and drinking too fast to look like a man, an old-timer told me the fellow who runs the room at closing is the one who drank the slowest all night. Took me a decade of headaches to believe him. Number 6, he ate a small piece of blame that was not his to bleed the heat out of a room. When two men were locked over whose fault a thing was, the man who wanted it ended would sometimes step in and take a sliver of it himself, say he should have spoken up sooner or caught it earlier. It cost him a little pride and handed both men away to quit defending themselves. Number 5, he spoke one beat at a time, like a man with nowhere he needed to be. Fast talk reads as nerves. The men who commanded a room spoke slowly enough that every word had to be waited for, and a room will wait if you make it. Augie never hurried a sentence in his life. Number 4, he stood where he could see the whole floor. The old men never sat with their backs to a door if they could help it. A little of that was caution learned the hard way, but most of it was simpler than caution. You cannot manage what you cannot see, and a man who can take in a room at a glance catches the trouble brewing at table 6 while it is still only a tightening in one man's jaw. These last few are the hardest of all, and they came less from any trick a man could practice than from who he had become by the time it counted. Number 3, he walked straight at the angriest man in the room and greeted him with real respect. Most men give the troublemaker a wide berth, which is the very thing that feeds him. The men who ran a room went right up to him, put out a hand, said his name warm, and asked after him as though he were the most important man in the place, and the fight would go out of him while his mouth was still half open. What a loud, angry man is mostly chasing is to be seen, and you had already seen him before he had to break anything to make you. I watched it work on men 3 times my size, and it worked far more often than it ever missed. Number 2, here is the one I told you to wait for, the rule these men leaned on hardest and almost never put into words, because it can only be shown. He would take the first shove and not give it back. When a thing finally tipped and a man put hands on him, he kept his own hands open at his sides and his feet right where they were, took the push, and answered it with something quiet, a half question. The man's first name said low. Nearly every time, that was what ended it. A man who shoves you is braced and leaning for the shove that comes back, and when his weight meets nothing, when you only stand there easy and unmoved, the thing he came in to do collapses out from under him, and there is no second move in him. It is the hardest thing on this list, and not for want of strength. Any fool can throw a punch. To stand still and open while a man comes at you in front of the whole room, is a kind of nerve we never had a good word for, and the men who had it could walk into any room on earth and hold it without once lifting a hand. Number 1, take all of it away. Take the open hands, the low voice, the name said first, the round stood at the right second, the slow walk toward the table, the patience to outlast a silence. Strip every technique off the list, and underneath all 29 of them, there is one plain thing. A chaotic room is a frightened room. Men get loud and mean and dangerous because under the noise they are afraid of looking small, of losing the job, of being pushed and having no answer ready. And every move on this list was a way of being the one man in the room who was not afraid so steadily and so plainly that the rest of them could set their own fear down beside his and borrow a little of his quiet instead. He calmed the men around him by being calm first, out where they could all see it. That was the whole of it, and it could not be faked because a frightened man playing it calm only makes a room more nervous. He had to be the steady one for real. Everything else on this list was only what that looked like from the outside. The Union Hall on the east side is still there. It is a church annex now, or it was the last time I drove by. The folding chairs carted off, and the day is gone for years. The room sits right where it always sat, the same room where I watched Augie stand up out of a folding chair and bring 100 furious men back to themselves with 2 sentences. But the room was never the thing. The thing was the man in the back row who knew how to stand up into all that noise and turn it, and there is no one in there now who could, because we pulled down every place that ever taught a man how. The walls are still standing. They are waiting on a kind of man who does not walk in anymore.